Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings. We still do have a wind warning issued for the rest of Sunday, as we are still seeing some fairly strong gusty winds as Storm Dara now moves into the North Sea and towards northern Europe. We'll have a look at the latest UKV, look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. There's a huge contrast to what we're seeing, or what we've seen the last couple of days. It's actually turning a lot drier and a lot more settled as we do head into this upcoming working week, as we do see high pressure properly taking control. Now we are going to see an easterly flow, a slightly colder air mass, and that will mean that in some regions it is really quite chilly indeed. Daytime highs are likely to get much above sort of the 5 or 6 degree mark for most, and overnight temperatures, especially in the north and the west towards the centre of the higher pressure system, likely to be well below freezing overnight. As this time of year, all you need is some slightly chilly air aloft, clear skies, and those temperatures will plummet. And that's exactly what we're seeing this week. Very, very cold conditions at the surface without those very cold upper air temperatures. A classic inversion taking place in the coming days. As we enter the longer range though, that higher pressure will eventually get pushed away, and for the week leading up to Christmas it does look like it's going to be very unsettled but pretty chilly as well. It looks like we're going to see big areas of low pressure coming out of Greenland and Iceland heading towards our shores. Wouldn't even rule out the risk of another named storm potentially in there, but more importantly it's a northwesterly flow, which means it will be cold and unsettled. Risk of a bit of snow maybe in the north, a classic though cold zonal pattern. That said, that is the week leading up to Christmas. What actually is going to be around for the Christmas period is still yet to be determined. It's right at the end of the extended range. We can't really say with any certainty at this stage, but for the time being, that kind of 15th to 20th of December point does look very unsettled and cold. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now as we start on the live radar, you can see Storm Dara has cleared out into Europe. Now it's kind of disintegrating away, losing a lot of its intensity, but on the back edge of this system we are now pulling in some pretty strong northeasterly winds, and it is bringing colder air in for northern areas, but in the far southeast and for much of England and Wales at the moment, it's just dragging in a lot of thick cloud and these bands of streaky rain. Very on and off in places, but you can see it is become a bit more organised here through the Midlands, and we've seen pretty much persistent rain for the past sort of 36 hours in some of these areas, so really quite horrible indeed. Temperatures are really cold as well, but it is slowly moving away, and the latest models have this precipitation disintegrating away in the next few hours. Recording this around 5 p.m, so hopefully by sort of 8, 9, 10 p.m, most of this rain has disintegrated away, or at least that's what's being modelled at the moment. It is still fairly gusty out there with the winds, and we'll look at the latest warning in a moment. Temperatures, you can see it is really poor still. Again, it's not freezing cold, it's not like we're in a cold spell, but it is very chilly nonetheless, only sort of 6 or 7 degrees, and with the wind chill making it feel a good few degrees colder than that. If you put on the wind speeds now, just to see what they're doing at the moment, you can see they are strongest on the North Sea coast, still strong in the far west inevitably, but strongest uniformly down this east coast as we are pulling in a northeasterly wind. Past 24-hour precipitation, you'll notice that a lot of the heavy rains transition from the west to the east and the northeast, as this is where all the rain's been coming in since yesterday evening, and you see why we've had a yellow warning for rain issued across those North Sea coasts, as we have just seen lots of rain moving in. It's not been terribly heavy, it's not been massively high precipitation rates, but it's been relentless for most of the day today and most of yesterday, so it really is totting up. And remember, this is only the past 24 hours. If we had the past 48 hours, we probably would see double this amount for most areas. But fortunately, it is now starting to wind down, and things should get a little more settled as we head into Monday. If you look at the weather warnings, we have this one warning issued that does expire in about an hour as I'm recording this, for stronger winds still associated with Storm Dara. Again, could continue into the latter part of the evening, but for most, we are expecting the strongest winds to die down. Again, this is a blanket warning, so it's not particularly targeted. So some areas, especially those North Sea coasts, could still see strong gusts, 50, 60 miles per hour through the evening, but for most, it is now dying away. If you look at the latest UKV now, you can see all of that rain slowly clearing through this evening, dying away. As we head into Monday, it's a pretty dry day, sunshine in the north and the west, the south and the east still cloud trapped with a few bits and bobs of drizzle, but most of the rain should have cleared. As we head into Tuesday, still a bit of rain in the far southeast, but for most it's a dry night and dry again into Tuesday. Still a lot of trapped cloud that will hold the temperatures down, but further northwards it is a classic cold winter's day. Temperatures low single digits with harsh overnight frosts, but still seeing plenty of sunshine. It does repeat for most this week. Wednesday's very similar, maybe a bit more low cloud around, and for Thursday maybe a bit more drizzle. But this is kind of the persistent pattern all week, as we do see this big area of high pressure sat right over the top of us. You can see why we've got a bit more cloud and mixing of air masses in the south. It's because we've got a bit of a stronger breeze in the north towards the centre of the high. We're not seeing those air masses mixing around because of the lack of wind, and that means those temperatures will just fall at the surface and will stay cold for much of this week. We can see that on the 2 metre temperatures. You can see today really chilly, only 5 to 7 degrees in most areas, feeling colder than that for quite a few. Overnight tonight, frost for much of the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, where we've got those clearer skies and the colder upper air temperatures. And as I said, into tomorrow, really chilly once again, 5 to 7 degrees, but hopefully the feels like should be a little bit better because we've got a lack of wind and rain. As we head into Monday night, though, harsh frost for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Pretty much wherever we have clearer skies towards that centre of the high, temperatures will drop down to kind of -5 to -10 potentially. And then as we head into Tuesday, another really chilly day, 4 to 6 degrees at best for most of England and Wales, and hardly getting above freezing in Scotland. As we head through Tuesday evening, again another really harsh overnight frost in the north and west, expanding a little bit more, and you see it's shifting slightly further southwards. That, as I said, is with the movement of the centre of the high pressure. And you see by the afternoon, once again, really poor, 4 to 7 degrees and hardly getting above freezing once again in many of those northern areas. The same can be said for Thursday, and again into Thursday afternoon, only 6 to 8 degrees, and likely to continue into Friday as well. Maybe even a frost starting to develop in the south, but it's much less likely because of all the mixing of that air. It is very cold this week, but it's not a wintry colder pattern. If we saw any precipitation moving in, it would all fall as rain because the dew points are slightly higher than what we'd need for snow, and of course the upper air temperatures aren't actually that cold. This is just a layer of very cold air getting trapped to the surface because of all the radiation that we can see overnight with those clearer skies. So it's a classic inversion taking place, really quite cold conditions for much of this week for those northern areas, but even further southwards we've got a bit more mixing of air. It will still be pretty chilly for the rest of this week. If you just finish by looking at the wind gusts, you see it's been a very gusty day once again today as Storm Dara clears. You can see the winds do slowly die down through this evening, but still fairly gusty all the way through to early hours of Monday. But by kind of Monday evening, we are looking at, absence of any really major gusts at all, down to maybe 20 or 30 miles per hour at most. Now, if you look at the longer range, if we start on the latest GFS, which has just come out, you can see Dara now is kind of disintegrating away into more of a general little cut-off low developing there in towards the Mediterranean. For the UK, though, under high pressure for much of this week. Eventually we break out of it very slowly next weekend, so not expecting a massive breakdown in the high, but a slow breakdown. And eventually into the following week, we do see northwesterly winds arriving, pretty chilly and pretty unsettled all the way towards the end of this run. You can see the airs coming in from the west and northwesterly direction, not from the southwesterly direction, which means if we put on the air masses, there's plenty of colder air masses mixing in. We will still see big milder sectors, but there will be quite a few colder sectors around, and that's why it will be fairly chilly in the longer term. You see the oscillating between blue, yellow and orange here, indicating that classic northwesterly flow into the longer term, into the lead up to Christmas. Of course, we're getting towards the 24th here, and it still is a conveyor belt of northwesterly winds. Cold sector, mild sector, big cold sector. So we're not seeing anything majorly cold at this stage, but remember, Christmas is still a number of weeks away. And as I said, longer term prospects still showing potentially a bit of blocking around the Christmas period. We'll have to wait and see. But at least for the week leading up, it does look fairly cool and unsettled at this stage. The GM is in pretty decent agreement. Again, high pressure taking control this week, eventually breaking down pretty slowly, and then we see the real barrage of northwesterly winds all the way to the end of the run here. Actually quite a long, far-fetched northwesterly. It does go pretty cold for a time, but again, it's not the sort of pattern that would give very cold conditions, potentially a bit of frost, a bit of snow in the north maybe. But again, you can see a big milder sector is getting ready to move in, so we'll have to wait and see. But nonetheless, chilly, unsettled, similar to the GFS. Now the ECMWF is fairly similar in the way of being unsettled, but it's slightly milder than the GFS and the GEM. And you can see why in a moment. The high pressure gets pushed away by lower pressure next week. We do see that northwesterly, but high pressure a bit more stubborn to our south, bit more of a diving jet stream in the mid-Atlantic, which means the wind eventually does come from a bit more of a west to southwesterly direction. So it's a very subtle shift, but you can see instead of coming in from a slight northwesterly, it's coming from a slightly southwesterly, which would encourage more milder sectors. There still would be cooler sectors, but they'd be smaller and less intense, but there would be larger and more intense milder sectors. So ECMWF, very similar, very unsettled, but more the way of a milder conditions there as we head towards sort of the week before Christmas, instead of the more colder unsettled temperatures that we're seeing from the GFS and the GEM. Now the ensembles are fairly on board with a cooler, more unsettled pattern. These are the latest GFS, not fully come out, so we'll go back to the 6 o'clock run. And you can see generally we are average to below average from the majority of runs. Not far enough below average to see any wintriness. Of course, we need to get down to kind of -6 to -8 to see that. But most around kind of -2 to -4. So chilly. Temperatures 5, 6, 7 degrees by day, feeling cold in the wind chill, and lots of precipitation, especially as you can see there, the week leading up to Christmas. Dry this week though, as I said, with that higher pressure around. So a classic cold zonality with lots of lower pressure into the longer term. See, the 2 meter temperatures are pretty poor in the longer term. Very few on some moments getting remotely close to kind of double digits, a few longer term, but most keeping us around the 5, 6, 7 degrees. You see the next week, very little diurnal range. Again, that's because of the mixing of air masses, not allowing those temperatures to drop away overnight. Further northwards, we see much bigger diurnal range with temperatures 2 or 3 degrees by day and -5 or lower by night. And finally, if we compare to the ECMWF, it is broadly very similar in terms of being unsettled longer term and generally a little bit chilly, but more ensemble members here closer to average. So a slightly milder trend. But regardless, we're not seeing many ensemble members going miles above average. And you see the ensemble average line doesn't get much above the 1991-2020 mean, even at the warmest of times. So still a relatively chilly and unsettled pattern into that longer term prospects. If we do just finish by looking at the the GFS for Glasgow, just to show you what we're seeing further northwards, you can actually see the upper air temperatures are actually pretty mild this week. But that's not telling you what we're seeing at the surface. Look at that, temperatures 1 or 2 degrees by day, well below freezing overnight, and it's all because we are seeing an inversion. Dew points are dropping quite low as well. Again, that air drying under the higher pressure. So this is a classic example of very cold conditions at the surface, but actually really quite mild conditions at the upper air temperature level, all due, as I said, to an inversion. So we do talk about inversions when we're looking at sort of longer term prospects, saying this pattern doesn't look cold, but actually at the surface it would be cold. We're seeing the exact pattern developing this week for those northern areas. So that actually the upper air temperatures are milder than they are in the south, but because of the stagnant air, because of the lack of mixing and the lack of cloud, it just allows those temperatures to drop away rapidly this time of year. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you again for another video soon.